The papers were already signed on his side. Miriam noticed that first. His signature in confident blue ink, dated 3 days earlier, as if he had been carrying these documents around waiting for the right moment to present them. I have tried to be as fair as possible. You will keep the apartment, obviously. It is in your name anyway. I am not trying to make this difficult. Theodore set the folder on the breakfast table between them, next to her untouched coffee. His voice carried the patient calm of a man explaining something obvious to someone who would need time to understand. Miriam looked at the folder without opening it. Her hands rested on the table, steady and still. Inside her chest, something was beginning to fracture, but she had learned long ago how to keep fractures from showing on her face. The terms are generous. My attorney said most women in similar circumstances would consider themselves fortunate. You will have security. Time to figure out what comes next. Similar circumstances. The phrase landed strangely, as if she were a category rather than a person. As if there were a standard template for wives being discarded, and she should be grateful her version included favorable terms. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. The morning light streamed through the windows of their elegant apartment. Cream-colored walls caught the sun. Fresh flowers Miriam had arranged yesterday sat in a crystal vase by the window. Traffic hummed 8 floors below, the ordinary sounds of a city beginning its day. Nothing about the room suggested that her marriage was ending. Theodore continued filling her silence with words. I have thought about this carefully. I know it is a lot to process. But I wanted to be straightforward with you. You deserve that much. You deserve that much. As if honesty were a gift he was bestowing. As if the baseline decency of telling your wife you were leaving her was something she should be thankful for. Miriam finally spoke. Her voice came out quieter than she intended, but steady. Is there someone else? Theodore hesitated. It was barely a pause. A half-second delay. A slight shift in his breathing. But Miriam had spent 6 years learning his rhythms. She knew what that hesitation meant before he opened his mouth to answer. Sophia Ballard. The name arrived with the tone of someone reporting a business development. No shame. No apology. Just information being transferred. She is the lead architect on the Whitfield project. We have been working closely together for the past year. Long hours. High pressure. She understands what it takes to operate at this level. She speaks the same language I do. Miriam absorbed this. Sophia Ballard. She had met her twice. Once at a project unveiling 18 months ago, where Sophia had presented her vision for restoring a historic hotel with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Once at a charity dinner Theodore had organized, where Sophia had stood at the edge of conversations, assessing the room with sharp eyes, dismissing most of what she found. She was in her early 40s. Angular. Precise. The kind of woman who made efficiency look elegant and made other women feel like they were taking up too much space simply by existing. We have gotten close. Theodore spoke as if this explained everything. She understands the pressure of what I am building. She can engage with the vision at the level it requires. Miriam processed the words. He was not just leaving her. He was upgrading. You are a wonderful person, Miriam. The kindness in his voice was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. You have been a wonderful companion. But I am building something significant here. The Whitfield project alone will change how people think about historic preservation in this country. I need someone beside me who can engage with that vision fully. Who lives and breathes this world. He paused as if choosing his next words carefully. You are content with your charity boards and your reading and your art consultations. There is nothing wrong with that. It is just not what I need anymore. Companion. The word landed like something cold settling into her chest. Not partner. Not wife. Not the woman he had chosen to build a life with. Companion. Like she was pleasant company he had enjoyed for a time but had now outgrown. Like she was a comfortable chair he had finally decided to replace with something more impressive. So you are asking me to sign divorce papers? Miriam said this slowly, measuring each word. Because your architect understands you better than your wife does. Do not reduce it to that. A thread of impatience entered Theodore's voice. This is about compatibility. About where we are both going. You want a quiet life. There is nothing wrong with that. But I need someone who wants to build empires. Sophia wants to build empires. Miriam looked at her husband. Really looked at him. For a moment she saw a stranger wearing Theodore's face. Or maybe she was seeing him clearly for the first time, without the softening filter of hope. How long? She asked. Does it matter? It matters to me. Theodore sighed. The sound of someone being asked unnecessary questions. Several months. Nothing physical until I made my decision. I wanted to do this correctly. I am not a cheater, Miriam. I am trying to handle this with integrity. Integrity. As if there were a proper procedure for dismantling 6 years of shared life. As if his restraint until he decided to leave somehow earned him points for honor. I need time to consider the terms. Miriam said. Theodore's expression tightened. For the first time since he had set the folder on the table, something flickered across his face that was not complete confidence. What is there to consider? I am offering you the apartment. That is worth $4 million. A substantial settlement. Complete financial security. You can take as long as you need to decide what you want to do with your life. Financial security. As if she were a dependent being released with adequate severance. I will have my attorney review everything. Miriam said. Theodore stared at her. You have an attorney. It was such a small moment. Such a brief flicker of surprise in his eyes. But it told Miriam everything she needed to know about how he saw her. How he had always seen her. He was so certain of her dependence that the possibility of her having independent legal representation had never occurred to him. She was Miriam, his quiet wife, the woman who attended his events and supported his vision and never complicated things with needs of her own. Of course she did not have an attorney. Why would she? What would she possibly need one for? I will find one, she said quietly. She stood. Her legs felt distant, like she was operating her body from somewhere outside herself. The breakfast room looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes ago. The cream walls. The fresh flowers. The morning light. But everything had changed. She walked toward the door. Miriam. Theodore's voice stopped her. I hope you understand this is not personal. I still care about you. I just need something different now. Not personal. Her husband was ending their marriage for another woman, dismissing 6 years of her life as insufficient, and it was not personal. I will be in touch through my attorney. Miriam said. She walked out of the breakfast room, down the hallway of the apartment they had shared, and did not look back. Behind her, she heard Theodore's phone buzz. She heard him answer it, his voice shifting into the confident register he used for business calls. Before she reached the front door, he was already talking about project timelines and investor meetings and deadlines. Her marriage had just ended, and he was already back to work. But something had shifted in Miriam. Something small and irreversible. For the first time in 6 years, she had disrupted his script. He had expected her to cry perhaps. To argue. To eventually sign the papers with gratitude for his generosity. Instead she had simply walked away and mentioned an attorney. It was not much. But it was a beginning. Miriam drove without destination. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. The city blurred past. Buildings Theodore had consulted on. Streets where they had walked during the early years when he still seemed interested in walking anywhere with her. The whole landscape of a life she had been living like a role in someone else's story. She passed the restaurant where they had celebrated their first anniversary. The park where Theodore had proposed after 14 months of courtship, dropping to one knee on a path lined with autumn leaves while strangers applauded and Miriam's heart had pounded with hope and fear in equal measure. She passed the Preservation Society headquarters where they had first met. Where everything had begun. The memories arrived without permission. She had been 29 years old. Newly returned from 3 years abroad, working with private foundations in Europe. Her father had been gently pressuring her to take a more active role in the family business, and she had been gently resisting, wanting something that felt like her own. The Preservation Gala had been a compromise. She would attend, represent the family quietly, make appropriate donations, and slip away early. She had registered under her mother's maiden name, Porter instead of Prescott, because she had wanted one evening without calculation. One evening where people did not assess her for access to her father's empire. One evening where she could simply be Miriam, art historian and foundation consultant, rather than Miriam Prescott, heir to a fortune so vast most people could not comprehend its scope. Theodore had approached her within the first hour. He had been 41 then, confident in a way that bordered on arrogance. Grey eyes sharp with intelligence and ambition. He had talked about his vision for historic preservation with genuine passion, his hands moving as he described buildings that did not exist yet, neighborhoods he wanted to restore to their original grandeur. He had asked what she did. She had told him the truth. Just not the complete truth. She consulted for private foundations. Her family had interests in hospitality and real estate. They preferred discretion. All of it accurate. None of it complete. She had wanted to know if someone could choose her. Just her. Without the weight of her family's invisible empire. Without the strategic networking that inevitably followed when people learned who she was. Without the careful calculation that entered people's eyes when they heard the name Prescott and began mentally cataloguing what she could do for them. Theodore had chosen her. He had pursued her with single-minded focus over the following months. Dinners at restaurants he carefully selected. Trips to historic properties he was considering for acquisition. Long conversations about art and architecture and the kind of legacy a person could leave behind. He had proposed after 14 months with a ring he had selected himself, in a restaurant he had reserved entirely for the occasion, with a speech about building a future together. And Miriam had said yes. Her heart had been pounding with hope. Her conscience had been whispering warnings she refused to hear. She had told herself she would reveal everything after the wedding. Once they were married, once he had committed to her completely, she would explain the omission. He would understand. Maybe he would even be relieved that she had tested him, that she had wanted to be sure their foundation was real. But the wedding had come and gone. Small and elegant, at her insistence. Her parents had attended with quiet dignity. Theodore's family and business associates had seen wealth but had not understood its scope. Had not realized that the understated bride came from a family whose net worth exceeded most people's capacity for imagination. And the right moment to tell him had never arrived. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. And the truth had sat between them like a wall she had built one stone at a time, each day of silence adding another layer to the barrier. Now, driving through the city with divorce papers waiting for her signature, Miriam finally understood what she had done. She had hidden herself. She had made herself small. She had waited for Theodore to see her, to choose her, to value her. And when he had not, she had blamed the hiding rather than questioning whether he was capable of seeing at all. She pulled into the parking lot of a cafe she had never visited. She went inside, ordered tea she did not intend to drink, and sat by the window watching people live their ordinary lives. Her phone buzzed. A text from Theodore's assistant. Mr. Crane wanted me to send you contact information for his attorney in case you need a referral for representation. Even this, he was trying to manage. Offering to help her find a lawyer. As if she were too helpless to locate one herself. As if the attorney he recommended would not be someone who would protect his interests while making her feel cared for. As if she needed his guidance even in the process of divorcing him. Miriam deleted the text. She opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she had not called in years. Margaret Ashworth. Chief Legal Counsel for Prescott Holdings. The woman who had managed her family's legal affairs for 3 decades. Miriam stared at the name for a long time. Then she made the call. Margaret answered on the first ring. Miriam. Just her name, spoken with warmth and relief and no questions. The voice of someone who had known her since childhood, who had been waiting for this call without knowing when it would come. It is good to hear from you. Margaret said. I need information. Miriam said. About my trust fund. About my position in the family structure. About everything. There was a pause. Not surprise. Just acknowledgement. Of course. Margaret said. When would you like to meet? The office where Miriam met Margaret bore no signage. It occupied a floor in a building downtown that housed dozens of unremarkable businesses. Accounting firms. Consulting companies. The kind of anonymous professional services that blended into the cityscape without attracting attention. From the outside, there was nothing to distinguish it from any other commercial space. Inside was a different story. The reception area was quiet, staffed by people who greeted Miriam by name without consulting any list. The carpet was thick and muted. The artwork on the walls was genuine. Pieces Miriam recognized from private collections that rarely displayed publicly. Margaret met her personally in the lobby. She was in her early 70s now. Silver-haired. Impeccably dressed in a way that communicated competence without flash. She had the composed demeanor of someone who had negotiated agreements that moved markets and shaped industries without ever feeling the need to mention it. She looked at Miriam with kind, assessing eyes. "You look tired," Margaret said gently. "I am tired." Margaret nodded as if this were expected. "Come. We have a lot to discuss." They walked together through corridors that seemed designed for discretion. Doors without nameplates. Conference rooms with soundproofed walls. The quiet architecture of privacy that serious wealth required. Miriam had grown up surrounded by this kind of careful invisibility. She had spent 6 years trying to forget it existed. The conference room overlooked the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the skyline. Buildings her family had financed. Developments her father's company had shaped. A landscape of power that operated quietly beneath the surface of ordinary life. Margaret slid a portfolio across the table without ceremony. No dramatic presentation. Just information, cleanly organized and ready for review. "Your trust fund has performed exceptionally," Margaret began. "Your grandfather established the initial allocation when you were born. Your father has managed it conservatively but effectively since then. It has grown substantially over the past 3 decades. She opened the portfolio to the first page. Current liquid assets total approximately $3 billion. Miriam absorbed this number. $3 billion. Theodore's entire net worth, built over 30 years of relentless work, celebrated in business magazines, discussed with or by his colleagues, was estimated at $12 billion. She had immediate access to a quarter of that in trust funds alone. That is before touching the primary family holdings. Margaret continued, turning to another page. Your position in the succession structure remains unchanged. You and your brother are equal heirs. When your father decides to transition leadership, you will share control of assets currently valued at approximately $90 billion. $90 billion. The number was so large it almost did not mean anything. It existed on a scale beyond ordinary comprehension, beyond the calculations of normal life. Miriam had known intellectually that her family operated at this level. She had grown up in it, after all. But she had spent 6 years trying to live as if it did not apply to her. You have immediate access to the trust, Margaret said. No approval needed from your father or the board. He made sure of that when you turned 25. He wanted you to have complete independence. Independence. The word landed heavily. Miriam had spent 6 years performing dependence. Making herself small. Making herself quiet. Waiting for her husband to notice her worth. She had hidden her family's resources so effectively that Theodore saw her as someone who needed his protection, his provision, his generous settlement terms. And all along, she had been capable of buying his entire company several times over. Your father has been concerned about you, Margaret said, her voice softening. He has respected your privacy. Respected your choice to keep the family separate from your marriage. But he has wanted you to reach out. He has been waiting. Something in Miriam's chest loosened. A knot she had not realized she was carrying. I thought he was disappointed in me, she said quietly. For disappearing. For choosing Theodore over the family. Margaret shook her head. He understood. You wanted to build something of your own. You wanted to be chosen for yourself, not your name. He has never faulted you for that. He only wished you would let him help when you needed it. Miriam looked at the portfolio in front of her. The neat columns of numbers. The carefully organized documentation of wealth she had spent years pretending she did not have. I need an attorney, she said. For the divorce. Someone who specializes in complex dissolutions. Someone Theodore will not know. I will have 3 names for you this afternoon. All discreet. All exceptionally competent. Thank you, Margaret. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her expression warm but serious. There is one more thing you should know. Something that came up in our routine portfolio reviews. Miriam waited. The Whitfield Restoration Project. Margaret said. Your husband's signature development. The historic hotel he has been working to restore for the past 3 years. Miriam nodded. She knew the Whitfield intimately. She had listened to Theodore discuss it for hundreds of hours. The challenges of historic preservation. The complications of modern infrastructure. The investors who needed constant reassurance. She had asked questions that helped him refine his approach. She had watched him work through problems she had quietly pointed him toward. The primary funding consortium includes multiple investment groups. Margaret continued. One of them is a holding company called Riverstone Capital. She paused, letting the name settle. Riverstone Capital is operated by Prescott Holdings. Your family controls approximately 40% of the total financing for the Whitfield project. Miriam went very still. Does Theodore know? She asked. No. The investment was structured through multiple corporate layers. There is no reason he would have connected it to your family. Prescott Holdings invests in historic preservation projects regularly. It has been part of our portfolio strategy for decades. This was simply a standard allocation. But the timing. The poetry of it. Theodore was building his legacy. His signature achievement. The project that would define his career. And he was doing it partially on money connected to the wife he had just dismissed as insufficient. He was telling her she did not understand his world while standing on foundations her family had helped finance. I did not arrange this. Miriam said slowly. I had no involvement in the investment decision. Of course not. The allocation was made through standard channels years before you married. Your father's team manages these investments independently. There is no conflict of interest, no impropriety. It is simply an interesting coincidence. Miriam stared out the window at the city below. Theodore had told her that morning that she did not understand what it took to operate at his level. That she was content with her quiet life while he built empires. That he needed a partner who could engage with his vision. And all along, her family's resources had been quietly supporting the very project he used to prove his superiority. Thank you for telling me, Miriam said. She stood, and Margaret walked her to the elevator. Your father will be glad to hear from you. Margaret said. Whenever you are ready. Tell him I am all right. Tell him I will call soon. Margaret nodded. He will be glad to hear it. The elevator doors opened. Miriam stepped inside. Miriam, Margaret said, just before the doors closed. You have always had power. You just forgot you were allowed to use it. The doors slid shut. Miriam rode down alone, watching the floor numbers descend, feeling something shift inside her that had been locked away for 6 years. She stepped out into the city. The same buildings. The same streets. The same landscape she had been living in. But everything looked different now. She had always had choices. She had simply stopped believing she was allowed to make them. That night, Miriam lay alone in the apartment she had shared with Theodore for 6 years. His side of the bed was empty. He had texted earlier. Something about a late meeting with the Whitfield investors. Dinner with colleagues. Do not wait up. She had read the message and felt nothing. A year ago, she would have waited anyway. Would have kept herself awake until she heard his key in the door. Would have pretended to be asleep when he finally came in. Would have told herself that his absence was just the price of being married to an ambitious man. 6 months ago, she would have felt hurt. Would have wondered if the late meeting was really about investors, or if it was about Sophia. Tonight she just noticed the empty space beside her like she would notice a changed piece of furniture. Present. Observable. No longer capable of wounding her. She thought about the portfolio Margaret had shown her. The numbers that represented her actual position in the world. Not the position Theodore had assigned her, but the one she had been born into and then hidden away. 3 billion in accessible assets. A share of 90 billion in family holdings. Resources so vast that Theodore's entire empire would be a rounding error on her father's balance sheet. And she had spent 6 years pretending she needed Theodore's settlement to survive. Why? The question turned over in her mind as she stared at the ceiling. She had wanted to be chosen for herself. That was true. She had wanted a love that was not calculated, a partnership that was not strategic, a marriage built on something real instead of something transactional. But somewhere along the way, wanting to be chosen for herself had become hiding herself entirely. She had made herself small so that Theodore would not feel threatened. Had muted her intelligence so that he could feel like the brilliant one. Had kept her opinions quiet so that he could believe his ideas were always his own. She had tested him by hiding her resources. And when he failed to see her value anyway, she had blamed herself for hiding instead of recognizing that he was incapable of looking. The truth settled over her like cold water. Theodore had never seen her. Not really. He had seen a pleasant, supportive, uncomplicated companion who fit comfortably into the margins of his life. He had loved that version of her. Or at least he had found it convenient. But the real Miriam. The one who understood business strategy. Who had connections across the art world. Who had been quietly shaping his decisions for years through careful questions and gentle guidance. That Miriam had been invisible to him. Because he had never bothered to look. Miriam reached for her phone and pulled up her father's contact information. She stared at the number for a long time. The direct line she had not called in over a year. The connection she had been afraid to use because using it felt like admitting failure. She pressed dial. He answered on the second ring. Miriam. Just her name. No surprise. No accusation. No demand for explanation. Hi, Dad. Are you all right? The question was simple and enormous at the same time. She could hear in his voice that he already knew about Theodore. Margaret would have told him, or he would have found out through other channels. Her father had always known more than he let on. I am getting divorced, she said. A pause. Not surprise. He had known. Just space for her to continue if she wanted to. I am sorry, he said finally. I know that is not what you hoped for. It is the right thing. I think I have known that for a while. I just did not want to admit it. What do you need? The question nearly undid her. Theodore had never asked her that. Not once in 6 years. He had told her what she should want. What she should be grateful for. What she should accept. He had explained what was reasonable and what was excessive. What she deserved and what she did not. But he had never simply asked what she needed. Nothing right now, Miriam said. I just wanted to hear your voice. You can call anytime. You know that. I know. I am sorry I disappeared. You did not disappear. Her father's voice was gentle but firm. You were trying to build something. I understand that. Not everything works out the way we hope. That does not mean you failed. It means you learned. They talked for 20 minutes after that. Nothing heavy. Just a father and daughter reconnecting across the distance she had created. He told her about the Foundation's recent work. About her mother's new garden project. About her brother's children growing up too fast. Normal things. Family things. When Miriam hung up, she felt steadier than she had in months. She looked around the bedroom. The expensive furniture Theodore had selected. The artwork he had approved. The careful aesthetic that reflected his taste rather than hers. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of reclaiming herself. Tonight, she just slept. Deeply and dreamlessly, for the first time in weeks. Miriam woke the next morning to an empty bed and a silent apartment. Theodore's side had not been slept in. No text message explaining his absence. No note on the kitchen counter. Just the quiet evidence of a man who no longer felt obligated to account for his whereabouts to his wife. A year ago, this would have worried her. 6 months ago, it would have hurt. This morning, she just noticed it. Observed it. And then moved on. She showered and dressed with more care than she had in months. Not the soft, easy clothes she had defaulted to during her years as Theodore's wife, but something tailored and precise. A suit she had not worn since before the wedding. The kind of outfit that communicated competence without needing to announce it. In the mirror, she looked more like herself. Or maybe more like a version of herself she had set aside when she decided that being Theodore's wife meant being smaller than she actually was. Her phone buzzed with a text from one of the attorneys Margaret had recommended. Patricia Vance from Mercer and Vance, the most prestigious family law firm in the state. They had an opening that afternoon if Miriam was available. She confirmed. The offices of Mercer and Vance occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in the financial district. The reception area was elegant in the way that serious money always presented itself. Understated. Confident. With nothing to prove. The receptionist greeted Miriam by name and offered her water, coffee, tea. Whatever she needed while she waited. She did not wait long. Patricia Vance was in her mid-50s. Silver-haired and sharp-eyed. With the calm authority of someone who had won cases other attorneys would not touch. She shook Miriam's hand firmly and led her to a corner office overlooking the city. "Margaret Ashworth speaks very highly of you," Patricia said, settling into her chair. "She mentioned you might be dealing with a complex situation." "My husband has filed for divorce," Miriam said. "He presented me with papers 3 days ago. He has already signed them. And you have not." "No. I wanted to have the terms reviewed first." Patricia nodded, unsurprised. "Tell me about the situation." Miriam told her. About the marriage. About Theodore's business. About Sophia. About the settlement offer that assumed Miriam had no independent resources and no options beyond accepting his generosity. And then she told her about her family. Patricia's expression did not change as Miriam explained her actual financial position. The trust fund. The family holdings. The connection to Prescott Holdings. But something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or the professional satisfaction of a lawyer who had just realized her case was far more interesting than it had initially appeared. "So your husband," Patricia said slowly, "is offering you a settlement based on the assumption that you are a dependent spouse with limited resources. And in reality, you could purchase his entire company several times over." "Yes. And he does not know this. He never asked." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "I have handled a lot of high net worth divorces. This is unusual. Is it going to be a problem?" "No. If anything, it simplifies certain aspects. You are not fighting for resources. You have your own. The question is simply ensuring the dissolution is handled accurately and fairly." She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "I am going to recommend a forensic accounting of marital assets," Patricia said. "This is standard procedure in complex divorces, but in your case, it is particularly important. We need to understand exactly what was accumulated during the marriage, what was brought in separately, and how various assets should be categorized. That is going to take time." "Yes. Several weeks, possibly longer." "Is that a problem?" Miriam thought about Theodore's impatience. His expectation that she would sign quickly and quietly. His certainty that she had no options beyond accepting his terms. "No. That is not a problem." "Good." Patricia made another note. "I should also mention that during the accounting process, various financial structures will become visible. Investment connections. Corporate relationships. Things that might not be obvious from surface-level documentation." She looked at Miriam directly. "If there are connections between your family's holdings and your husband's business, they will likely surface during this review." Miriam thought about the Whitfield project. About the 40% of funding that traced back to Prescott Holdings through layers of corporate structure. "I understand," she said. "Are you comfortable with that?" "I am comfortable with accuracy." Patricia smiled. The first genuine warmth Miriam had seen from her. "Good. That is exactly the right answer." The Preservation Society dinner was scheduled for that Friday. One of Theodore's regular professional obligations. The kind of event Miriam had attended dozens of times over the past 6 years. She almost did not go. These dinners followed a predictable pattern. The spouses were expected to smile, look elegant, and refrain from interrupting the important conversations happening around them. Miriam had learned her role perfectly. Pleasant. Supportive. Invisible. She contributed nothing and expected nothing in return. But then she thought about Theodore's certainty that she would fade quietly into the background of his life. That she would hide from the embarrassment of being left. That she would make his transition to Sophia smooth and uncomplicated. She decided to show up. The restaurant was upscale and private. Reserved for Theodore's inner circle. Investors. Developers. architects, and their various partners. When Miriam arrived, Theodore was already holding court at the center of the main table. A glass of wine in his hand and Sophia Ballard at his side. Sophia's hand rested on Theodore's arm with casual possessiveness. She was wearing something architectural and severe. Her sharp features arranged in an expression of engaged intelligence. She laughed at something Theodore said, and the sound carried across the room. Bright and confident and very deliberately audible. Theodore noticed Miriam's entrance. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps. Or irritation. He had expected her to stay home. To begin the process of disappearing from his life before the divorce was even finalized. Instead, here she was. Dressed carefully. Composed entirely. Taking her seat at the table as if nothing had changed. Miriam. Theodore's voice was smooth, giving nothing away. I did not expect you tonight. I am still your wife. Miriam said pleasantly. These are still my professional obligations. Sophia's eyes swept over Miriam with cool assessment. Taking in the expensive dress. The careful makeup. The quiet confidence that had not been there last time they met. Of course. Sophia said, her voice warm with false friendliness. It is good to see you, Miriam. Theodore mentioned you have been processing things. Processing things. As if grief and divorce were an administrative task Miriam was working through. I have been busy, Miriam said. But I always make time for important events. The dinner proceeded as these dinners always did. Business talk dominated the conversation. Market projections. Zoning complications. The Whitfield project and its potential to reshape the entire downtown corridor. Theodore was animated. Energized. Performing his expertise for an appreciative audience. Sophia contributed sharp observations, challenging him in ways that made him laugh. They had developed a rhythm together, a call and response pattern of professional banter that made everyone at the table aware of their connection. Miriam watched them and understood the dynamic with perfect clarity now. Sophia performed intelligence loudly enough that Theodore noticed it. She challenged him just enough to make him feel like he was with an equal, but never so much that he actually had to adjust his worldview or share the spotlight. Miriam had offered her intelligence quietly for 6 years, and Theodore had absorbed it without acknowledgement. One of Theodore's colleagues, a developer named Gerald who had always treated Miriam with polite dismissal, launched into a familiar story about Theodore's brilliance in securing the Whitfield financing. The consortium was ready to walk, Gerald said, gesturing with his wine glass. The risk assessment had them spooked. But Theodore completely reframed the approach. Showed them how positioning it as a heritage preservation project rather than a commercial development changed the entire value proposition. Instead of focusing on their financial exposure, he got them excited about cultural investment. Completely shifted the narrative. The table nodded appreciatively. Theodore accepted the praise with practiced humility. Miriam listened to this account and remembered the evening it had actually happened. They had been in the study. Theodore had been frustrated, running through projections that were not working, preparing for a meeting that was likely to end with the consortium withdrawing their commitment. Miriam had been reading nearby. She had looked up from her book and asked a single question. What if you positioned it differently? Instead of defending against their concerns, what if you gave them something to believe in? Cultural preservation rather than commercial risk. Heritage investment rather than property development. Theodore had stared at her. Then he had grabbed his laptop and started recalculating everything. Miriam was not there when it happened. She had deliberately scheduled a meeting with the museum board to discuss her access initiative. But Theodore's reaction was immediate and intense. He called her 17 times before she finally answered. What is this? His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. A forensic accounting. You want to audit my entire business. I want an accurate assessment of marital assets. Miriam said calmly. That is standard procedure in high-asset divorces. This is invasive and unnecessary. I have already outlined everything in the settlement. Your outline and a formal accounting are different things. My attorney advised thoroughness. Your attorney is trying to run up billable hours and delay the process. My attorney is protecting my interests. Theodore was breathing hard. She could hear it through the phone. the sound of a man whose control was slipping. "You are doing this to punish me," he said. "Because of Sophia. You are angry, so you are trying to make this difficult. I am doing this because I am worth doing it correctly for. That is all." She hung up before he could respond. That evening, Patricia Vance called with an update. "The forensic accounting is revealing some interesting patterns," Patricia said. "Your husband's business is more interconnected than his surface filings suggest. Multiple holding companies, layered corporate structures, investment partnerships that feed into his major projects. Is that unusual? It is sophisticated. The kind of structure you see in high-level development work." Patricia paused. "What is particularly interesting is the financing for the Whitfield project." Miriam waited. "The primary consortium includes several major players. One of them is an entity called Riverstone Capital. I am aware of that connection. I assumed you might be. Riverstone Capital traces back through several corporate layers to Prescott Holdings, your family's company. My father's investment team manages a large portfolio. Historic preservation has been part of their strategy for decades. Of course, there is nothing improper about the investment. It was made through standard channels, with no apparent influence from your relationship." Patricia paused. "But the optics are significant." Meaning your husband has been building his signature project, the achievement that will define his career, with substantial financial support connected to the family of the wife he is divorcing because she does not understand his world. Miriam looked out the window at the city lights. Theodore had told her that morning 3 weeks ago that she did not understand what it took to operate at his level. That she was content with her quiet life while he built empires. That he needed a partner who could engage with his vision. And all along, her family's resources had been quietly supporting the very project he used to prove his superiority. "He does not know," Miriam said. "Not yet. But when this information becomes part of the public record during asset disclosure, he will. I am not trying to embarrass him. I understand that. But embarrassment may be a side effect of accuracy." Patricia's voice was matter-of-fact. "We can proceed with complete transparency. Everything above board. Everything legally sound. The truth will emerge through proper channels. Whether your husband finds that embarrassing is his concern, not yours." Miriam nodded slowly, though Patricia could not see her. The Preservation Society's annual gala was scheduled for the following week. The most important event on Theodore's calendar. The night the Whitfield project would be officially announced. The culmination of 3 years of work. It was also, Miriam knew, the event where Theodore planned to appear publicly with Sophia for the first time. He expected Miriam to stay home. To hide from the humiliation of being left. To make his transition smooth and uncomplicated. But something had shifted in Miriam over the past weeks. Something fundamental and irreversible. She was no longer interested in making things easy for Theodore. She was no longer interested in being invisible. And she was beginning to understand that the truth she had hidden for 6 years was about to emerge into the light. Not because she had chosen to reveal it, but because accuracy had a way of surfacing, sooner or later, whether people were ready for it or not. Theodore had built his career on foundations he did not understand. He had dismissed his wife as insufficient while standing on ground her family had helped create. He had looked at her for 6 years and seen only what he wanted to see. And now, finally, he was about to learn what he had missed. The gala was in 3 days. The truth was coming. And Miriam was ready to stop hiding. The morning of the gala arrived with pale autumn light filtering through the apartment windows. Miriam had slept alone again. Theodore had not come home the night before. No text. No explanation. Just the silent absence of a man who had already moved on, who was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up with his heart. She stood at her closet for a long time, considering her options. For 6 years, she had dressed for Theodore's events with careful attention to his preferences. Nothing too bold. Nothing that would draw attention away from him. Colors that receded. Silhouettes that suggested elegance without demanding notice. She had become expert at occupying space without filling it. Tonight would be different. She chose a gown she had never worn. Purchased 3 years ago for an event she had ultimately skipped because Theodore had mentioned, casually, that it might be too much for the occasion. It had hung in her closet ever since. Waiting. The dress was midnight blue. Simple in cut but extraordinary in execution. The kind of garment that communicated wealth and taste without shouting either. The kind of dress that made people look twice, then look again. She laid it on the bed and looked at it for a long moment. Tonight, she would stop being invisible. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Historic Preservation Center, a building that Theodore had helped restore 5 years ago, one of his early signature projects. The irony was not lost on Miriam as her car pulled up to the entrance. She had arrived deliberately late. Not dramatically so. Just enough that the room would already be full when she entered. Just enough that heads would turn. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over hundreds of guests in formal attire. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with champagne and canapés. The whole scene was designed to communicate success, sophistication, the quiet power of people who shape cities. Theodore stood near the center of the room, surrounded by his usual circle of investors and colleagues. Sophia was at his side, wearing something red and architectural that demanded attention. Her hand rested on his arm with easy possessiveness. They looked like a couple. A power couple. The kind of pairing that made sense to people who valued ambition above all else. Miriam paused at the entrance to the ballroom. For a moment, she felt the old instinct rise up. The urge to slip in quietly. To find a corner. To make herself small and unobtrusive. To play the role she had perfected over 6 years of marriage. Then she remembered Margaret's words. You have always had power. You just forgot you were allowed to use it. The accounting is revealing some very interesting financial structures. We should discuss before the next filing. I will need your input on how to proceed. Miriam confirmed the meeting. Behind her, the gala continued. Theodore and Sophia were somewhere inside, probably managing the fallout from Henry Caldwell's casual revelation. The whole room was surely buzzing with speculation now. Miriam Prescott. Did you know? I had no idea. How did Theodore not know? Let them speculate. Miriam had spent 6 years keeping herself small for Theodore's comfort. She had hidden her family. Hidden her resources. Hidden her intelligence and her connections and her capabilities. All because she wanted to be loved for herself alone. But that was not what had happened. Theodore had not loved her for herself. He had loved the absence of herself. The empty space where a real person should have been. The pleasant, uncomplicated companion who never challenged him. Never competed with him. Never required him to see her as an equal. Now that space was filling up again. And Miriam was done apologizing for taking up room. Theodore came home that night looking like a man who had not slept in days. His tie was loosened. His jacket hung from his hand rather than his shoulders. His face carried an expression Miriam had never seen before. Something between anger and fear and genuine confusion. He found her in the study, working on her foundation proposal as if it were any other evening. We need to talk, he said. About who you are. About your family. About the fact that you have apparently been lying to me for 6 years. Miriam saved her document and turned to face him. I did not lie, she said calmly. I simply did not correct your assumptions. That is semantics. No. It is accurate. You assumed my family was wealthy but ordinary. You never asked for details. You never showed interest in my background beyond the surface level. I let you make those assumptions because I wanted to know if you would choose me without the context of what my family could offer you. Theodore ran his hand through his hair. Your father is one of the wealthiest men in the world, Miriam. That is not a detail. That is fundamental information. Why? Miriam asked. How would it have changed anything? It changes everything. Exactly. Miriam's voice was quiet but steady. It changes everything. People treat me differently when they know. They want access. They want introductions. They want to leverage my family's resources. I wanted to know if you would choose me when I was just me. Without the calculation. Without the strategy. She paused. And you did choose me. You pursued me. You proposed. You married me. And then you stopped seeing me. You had a wife who understood your business better than most of your employees. who had connections across the art world, who gave you ideas that saved deals and built relationships. And you dismissed all of it as hobby interest because seeing the truth would have required you to treat me as an equal. Theodore's face hardened. You made me look like a fool. I have been offering you a settlement like you are some dependent spouse, and you are sitting on a fortune that makes my net worth look like pocket change. I never asked you for a settlement. You offered it based on your beliefs about me. That assumption was yours, not mine. You should have told me. You should have seen me. The words hung in the air between them. You should have noticed that I understood your business better than you realized. Miriam continued. You should have wondered why I had connections to galleries and foundations and investment professionals. You should have asked about my consulting work instead of dismissing it as something to keep me busy. But you did not ask. Because you were not interested. You were comfortable with your version of me. The version that required nothing from you. Theodore was quiet for a long moment. His expression shifted through several emotions. Anger. Confusion. Something that might have been hurt. What do you want from me? He asked finally. An apology. Acknowledgement. Do you want me to beg you not to divorce me now that I know who you really are? I do not want anything from you. Miriam stood. I want to move forward with the divorce exactly as planned. You were right that we want different things. That has not changed. Everything has changed. For you perhaps. Not for me. I have always known who I was. You are just learning. Miriam paused at the door. That is your tragedy, Theodore. Not mine. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. A text from Sophia. She wants to know if I am coming to the investor meeting tomorrow. He said. Then you should go. She thinks you are trying to sabotage the divorce out of jealousy. Miriam almost laughed. I am trying to finalize the divorce with an accurate accounting of assets. If Sophia interprets basic legal protection as jealousy, that tells me everything I need to know about how she sees other women. She is protective of me. She is performing ownership. There is a difference. Theodore's jaw tightened. You do not know her. I do not need to. Miriam turned to face him fully. I know the role she is playing because I played it too. The difference is she is playing it louder. She will challenge you just enough to make you feel like you are with an equal, but not so much that you actually have to adjust your worldview. She will be ambitious in ways that complement your ambition instead of competing with it. She will be the partner you think you need. And what kind of partner do I actually need? Miriam considered the question seriously. Someone who does not need you at all. She said finally. Someone who is too busy building their own empire to orbit yours. Someone who forces you to be a satellite sometimes instead of always being the sun. She paused. But I do not think you are capable of that. And honestly, I do not think Sophia will challenge you to become capable of it. She will make you comfortable, Theodore. And you will mistake comfort for partnership. Theodore stared at her like she was a stranger. Who are you? He asked. Such a simple question. But it contained everything. 6 years of marriage. 6 years of missed opportunities. 6 years of looking at her without ever really seeing. I am the person I have always been. Miriam said. Intelligent. Capable. Strategic. Connected. Wealthy in ways you are only beginning to understand. I am my father's daughter. I am a consultant with expertise you dismissed as hobby interest. I am someone who gave you ideas that saved deals and connections that built relationships. I am someone who made herself small because she wanted to be loved without calculation. She held his gaze. But I am done being small, Theodore. I am done waiting for you to notice me. And I am done hiding who I am because it might make you uncomfortable. She walked out of the study, leaving Theodore standing alone in the room where she had spent 6 years quietly supporting his career. When she reached the bedroom, she closed the door and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel vindicated. She just felt clear. Finally. Completely. Irreversibly clear. The weeks following the gala unfolded like dominoes falling. The forensic accounting completed its work, documenting every financial connection, every corporate structure, Every investment flow that traced between Theodore's projects and the broader world of high-level development finance. The Whitfield Consortium connection became public record during the asset disclosure process. Theodore learned, officially and legally and inescapably, that 40% of the financing for his signature project traced back through corporate layers to Prescott Holdings. His wife's family had been funding his greatest achievement. The irony was exquisite. And the business community noticed. Within days, the whispers began. Did you hear about Theodore Crane? His wife was a Prescott the whole time. No, he had no idea. Can you imagine? She could have bought his company outright. He thought she was just a society wife. The narrative Theodore had been building for years collapsed without anyone needing to argue against it. The story of the self-made visionary who had outgrown his simple supportive wife. People drew their own conclusions. His professional circles began looking at him differently. Not as the brilliant developer who understood people and deals better than anyone, but as the man who had been married to one of the wealthiest women in the country and had never bothered to notice. If he could not see what was right in front of him at home, how sharp could his business judgment really be? The Whitfield project proceeded on schedule. It would be successful. It would transform the historic hotel into something remarkable. But Theodore's name would always carry an asterisk now. The silent footnote that his greatest achievement was partially built on his former wife's family money. And that his greatest failure had been not seeing her clearly enough to know it. Miriam spent those weeks building. Not rebuilding. Building. Creating something entirely new from the foundation of who she had always been. Her Access initiative gained momentum. The proposal for expanding public engagement with private art collections attracted attention from museums and foundations across the country. Organizations wanted to partner with her. Boards wanted her expertise. The career she had set aside to be Theodore's wife was finally beginning to take shape. She moved out of the apartment 2 weeks after the gala. Theodore was not home when she left. She did not leave a note. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said. She took only what was hers. The artwork she had collected before the marriage. The books that had traveled with her through years of living abroad. The photographs of her family. The small objects that held meaning. Everything else, she left behind. The furniture Theodore had selected. The decor he had approved. The careful aesthetic that had always reflected his taste rather than hers. She walked out of the apartment with 2 suitcases and did not look back. Her new apartment was smaller, quieter, entirely her own. She spent the first night alone, sitting by the window with a glass of wine, looking out at a different view of the city. Different buildings, different lights, a different perspective on the same landscape. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in late October. Miriam did not attend the signing. Her attorney handled everything by proxy while Miriam sat in a conference room in another city entirely, meeting with preservation societies about her Access initiative. The final terms were equitable, as they should have been. The forensic accounting had established an accurate picture of marital assets. What belonged to Theodore remained his. What belonged to Miriam remained hers. There were no dramatic revelations at the end. No confrontation across a conference table. No final words exchanged between husband and wife. Just signatures on documents. The legal dissolution of a union that had never been what either of them thought it was. Patricia Vance called that afternoon to confirm everything was complete. "How do you feel?" she asked. Miriam considered the question. "Relieved," she said finally. "And a little sad. Not for what I am losing. For what was never really there. That is a healthy perspective. It has taken me a while to get here. Most things worth arriving at do." Theodore called her once. A week after the divorce was finalized. Miriam was in her hotel room, preparing for a meeting with the board of a major preservation foundation. Her Access initiative had gained momentum over the past months. Multiple organizations wanted to partner with her. The career she had set aside to be Theodore's wife was finally beginning to take shape. When she saw his name on her phone, she almost did not answer. But there was something to be said for closure. For the clear ending of a chapter. "Miriam." His voice sounded different. Quieter. Less certain. "Theodore. I wanted to." He paused. I did not know. About your family. About any of it. If I had known. You would have what? Miriam interrupted gently. Treated me as a strategic asset instead of a pleasant companion. I am not sure that is better. I would have seen you differently. That is exactly the problem, Theodore. Miriam looked out the window at the unfamiliar city skyline. You needed external information to see me. You needed to learn my family's name and my family's net worth before I became visible to you. But I was always there. The person who asked good questions. The person who made useful connections. The person who understood your work deeply and contributed to it quietly. That person was invisible to you for 6 years. I did not mean. Learning who my family is does not change that. It proves it. Your respect was conditional on calculation, not observation. You could not see me until there was something in it for you to see. Theodore was silent for a long moment. I am sorry, he said finally, for not seeing you, for not asking questions, for all of it. It was the closest he had ever come to genuine acknowledgement. Thank you for saying that, Miriam said. And she meant it. Not because the apology fixed anything, but because it suggested some capacity for growth. Some possibility that Theodore might learn from what had happened. Sophia and I. He started. I hope she makes you happy. Miriam meant that too. I genuinely do. But I suspect she will eventually face the same discovery I did. That being chosen by you is not the same as being seen by you. You have a pattern, Theodore. You find impressive women and then you flatten them into supporting roles. You take what they offer and retell the story with yourself as the only protagonist. She paused. When that realization arrives for Sophia, I hope you handle it with more grace than you handled me. Theodore did not respond. Goodbye, Theodore, Miriam said. She ended the call without waiting for his reply. The city outside her window was unfamiliar. New streets. New buildings. New possibilities. Miriam stood at the glass, watching people move through their days on the sidewalks far below. They did not know her here. Did not know her family name or her net worth or her failed marriage. She was just a woman in a hotel room, looking out at a world that did not know her yet. It was a strange kind of freedom. She thought about Theodore at the gala, surrounded by people who now looked at him differently. She thought about Sophia, performing intelligence loudly enough to be noticed, not realizing that loudness was not what Theodore had trouble hearing. She thought about her father, whose power operated in silence, who had taught her that true capability did not need to announce itself. She had tried to live by that principle. She had been silent. She had been invisible. But silence and invisibility were not the same thing. Silence was a choice, a strategy, a position of power. Invisibility was an imposition. What happened when someone refused to look closely enough to see you? Theodore had made her invisible. She had allowed it because she had confused it with silence. Never again. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Your father wanted me to let you know he is proud of you. Also, the board approved the Access Initiative funding. They want to discuss expansion. Miriam smiled. She picked up the phone and called Margaret to discuss the next phase of her foundation work. There were projects to launch, partnerships to build, a whole career to construct from the ground up. For the first time in years, she was standing in the center of her own gravity, building something that was entirely hers, taking up space without apology. She was not afraid of being seen anymore. She was only just beginning to show the world who she actually was. 3 years passed. Miriam stood on a stage in front of an audience of preservation professionals, accepting an award for her work in expanding public access to private art collections. The initiative she had built from nothing had transformed into something remarkable. A network of partnerships between private collectors, public institutions, and community organizations that was changing how ordinary people engaged with art and history. In her acceptance speech, she thanked the organizations and individuals who had supported her work. She talked about the importance of access, of visibility, of making sure that beautiful things were not hidden away where only a privileged few could see them. She did not mention Theodore. She did not need to. Her success spoke for itself. Not loud and demanding, but clear and steady and entirely her own. In the audience, her father sat in the front row, watching his daughter with quiet pride. Her mother sat beside him, holding his hand. They had waited years for her to find her way back to herself. To stop hiding. To stop making herself small for someone who could not see her. Now here she was. Finally visible. Finally taking up all the space she deserved. After the ceremony, Miriam stood in the reception area, accepting congratulations from colleagues and partners. A young woman approached her. Early 30s. Well-dressed. Something familiar in her eyes. Ms. Prescott. The woman said. I hope you do not mind me introducing myself. I am writing a profile on women in preservation philanthropy for a major publication. I would love to interview you about your work. Miriam smiled. I would be happy to discuss the Access Initiative. Actually, the woman hesitated. I was hoping to ask about something else as well. Your marriage to Theodore Crane. How it ended. What happened after? Miriam's smile did not waver. I do not discuss my previous marriage. She said gently. It is not part of my story anymore. I understand. But the details are fascinating. The hidden identity. The family fortune. The way everything came out. People are interested. I am sure they are. Miriam said. But my interest is in the work I am doing now. Not in the past. I have moved beyond. If you would like to discuss the Access Initiative, I am available. If you are looking for gossip about my divorce, you will need to find another source. The young woman nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. Of course. I apologize. The initiative it is. They scheduled an interview for the following week. Miriam watched the woman walk away and felt nothing but peace. The story of her marriage to Theodore was not a secret. The details had emerged through legal filings and industry gossip and the inevitable flow of information in professional circles. But it was not her story anymore. Her story was the work she was building. The connections she was making. The difference she was creating in how people accessed and experienced art. Her story was her own now. Not defined by Theodore. Not shaped by hiding. Not limited by anyone's failure to see her. Just hers. That evening, Miriam had dinner with her parents at their home outside the city. The house was large but warm. Filled with art her mother had collected over decades. Gardens her father had designed himself. The accumulated evidence of a life well lived. They sat on the terrace as the sun set, watching the light change over the hills. We are proud of you. Her father said. You know that. I know. Not just for the award. Her mother added. For all of it. For finding your way back to yourself. For building something meaningful. For not letting what happened with Theodore define you. Miriam looked at her parents. At the love in their eyes. The acceptance. The patience they had shown during the years she had been distant. I am sorry I stayed away so long. She said. I thought I needed to prove something. That I could build a life without the family name. Without the resources. Without any of it. You did not need to prove anything to us. Her father said. I know. I needed to prove it to myself. And then I realized I was not proving anything. I was just hiding. Making myself smaller so someone else would not feel threatened. Her mother reached over and took her hand. That is not who you are. No. Miriam agreed. It is not. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge. Have you heard from him? Her father asked finally. Theodore. Not in years. Miriam said. The last time we spoke was right after the divorce was finalized. He called to apologize. Or to try to understand. I am not sure which. And I told him the truth. That he had never really seen me. That learning who my family was did not change that. It just proved it. Her father nodded slowly. He is remarried now. You know. I heard. To the architect. Sophia. Yes. Miriam's mother looked at her with concern. Does that bother you? No. Miriam said. And she meant it. I do not wish him ill. I just do not think about him very much anymore. He is part of a chapter that is closed. I am interested in the chapters that are still being written. Her father smiled. That is exactly the right way to look at it. They talked for another hour. About the foundation. About her brother's children. About plans for the holidays. Normal family conversation. The kind of easy connection Miriam had missed during the years she had kept herself apart. When she drove home that night, she felt full. Not of answers or certainty, but of something better. Belonging. She belonged to herself now. And she belonged to her family. And she belonged to the work she was building. That was more than enough. Theodore watched the ceremony from his office. The live stream playing on his computer while he worked late. He had heard about the award. The business community still talked about Miriam occasionally. The Prescott heiress who had rebuilt herself after a quiet divorce. Who had turned her art expertise into something significant. Who had become a force in preservation philanthropy. The narrative about their marriage had shifted over the years. It was no longer the story of a visionary who had outgrown his simple wife. It was the story of a man who had missed what was right in front of him. A cautionary tale about the blindness of success. Theodore had married Sophia 8 months after the divorce was finalized. They had divorced 2 years later. The dissolution even more acrimonious than his split from Miriam. Sophia had been everything Miriam was not. Loud. Ambitious. Demanding of attention. Theodore had thought that was what he wanted. But Sophia had also been competitive in ways that did not complement him. Challenging in ways that did not support him. Ambitious in directions that did not orbit his goals. She had wanted to be seen too. And Theodore, it turned out, had trouble seeing anyone who demanded to be looked at. His vision was only calibrated for people who asked nothing. And by the time he understood what he was actually looking for, Miriam was long gone. He watched her on the stage, accepting her award, thanking her supporters. She looked different now. More solid somehow. More present. The quiet woman who had faded into the background of his events was gone. In her place was someone who commanded attention simply by occupying space. She had always been this person, he realized. He had just never looked closely enough to see it. The ceremony ended. The live stream went dark. Theodore sat alone in his office, surrounded by the trappings of success, and understood finally what he had lost. Not a wife. Not even a fortune. He had lost the chance to be seen clearly by someone who had been willing to look. And that, he now understood, was the only thing that had ever really mattered. 6 months later, Miriam received an unexpected invitation. Theodore's company was hosting a retrospective event. 25 years of historic preservation work. A celebration of projects completed and legacies built. All the major figures in the industry would be there. The invitation arrived at her office. Formal. Impersonal. Her name printed in elegant script. Ms. Miriam Prescott. Not Mrs. Crane. Not even Ms. Crane. Just her name. Her real name. She considered the invitation for a long time. Her first instinct was to decline. She had no desire to revisit that chapter of her life. No need to prove anything to Theodore or his colleagues. No interest in the whispers that would follow her through the room. But something made her hesitate. She thought about the woman she had been 6 years ago. The woman who had hidden herself. Who had made herself small. Who had been so afraid of not being chosen that she had forgotten how to be seen. That woman would have declined the invitation. Would have stayed home. Would have protected herself from discomfort. But Miriam was not that woman anymore. She was someone who took up space now. Someone who did not hide from difficult situations. Someone who could walk into any room and know exactly who she was. She picked up the phone and called her assistant. "Please RSVP yes to the Crane Development Retrospective," she said. "I will be attending." The event was held at the Whitfield Hotel. The restoration had been completed 2 years earlier. A masterpiece of historic preservation that had transformed a crumbling landmark into a thriving luxury destination. The project that had defined Theodore's career. The achievement built partially on her family's investment. Miriam arrived alone, wearing a simple black dress that communicated elegance without effort. She walked through the grand lobby, past the restored marble columns and crystal chandeliers, and felt nothing but appreciation for the beauty of the space. It was beautiful work. Whatever Theodore's failings as a husband, his talent for preservation was genuine. The ballroom was filled with industry figures. Developers and architects and investors and philanthropists. Many of them recognized her. Some approached with warm greetings. Others watched from a distance, curious about her presence. She circulated through the room with easy confidence, discussing projects and partnerships, accepting compliments on her own work, existing fully in a space that might once have intimidated her. Theodore found her near the end of the evening. He looked older than she remembered. Grey at the temples now. Lines around his eyes that had not been there before. Something in his expression that suggested weariness rather than the relentless energy she had known. "Miriam," he said. "Theodore. I was not sure you would come. I was not sure either." They stood together for a moment in awkward silence. Two people who had once shared a life, now strangers who happened to have a history. "The hotel looks beautiful," Miriam said finally. "You should be proud." "Thank you." Theodore paused. "I heard about your award. The Access Initiative. It sounds like important work." "It is. I am proud of it." "You should be." Another silence stretched between them. "Miriam," Theodore said finally. "I wanted to tell you. I understand now. What I missed. What I failed to see. It took me a long time, but I understand." Miriam looked at him. At the man she had once loved. The man she had hidden herself for. The man who had looked at her for 6 years and seen only what he wanted to see. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "I appreciate it. I am sorry. Truly sorry. For all of it. I know. If I could go back. But you cannot," Miriam said gently. "None of us can. We can only move forward." Theodore nodded slowly. "You seem happy," he said. "You seem like yourself." "I am myself," Miriam agreed. Finally, she looked around the beautiful room. At the restored grandeur of a historic building. At the crowd of accomplished people. At the evidence of Theodore's life work. And she felt nothing but peace. "Goodbye, Theodore," she said. She did not wait for his response. She simply turned and walked away. Through the ballroom. Through the lobby. Out into the night air. The city spread before her. Buildings and lights and possibilities. She had spent years hiding from this world. Years making herself small. Years waiting for someone else to see her worth. But she did not need anyone to see her anymore. She could see herself. And that was everything. Miriam walked to her car and drove home to her own apartment. Her own life. Her own future. Behind her, Theodore stood in the lobby of his greatest achievement, watching her go. He understood now what he had lost. Not a fortune. Not a strategic alliance. He had lost a woman who had been willing to love him without calculation. A woman who had hidden her power because she wanted to be chosen for herself. A woman who had offered him everything and received nothing in return but dismissal. He had lost the chance to be seen by someone who had known how to look. And that loss, he now understood, was permanent. There was no version of the future where he could undo what he had done. No apology that could restore what he had carelessly discarded. No amount of success that could fill the space where a real partnership might have been. He had built empires. He had restored landmarks. He had accumulated wealth and recognition and all the markers of achievement. But he had never learned how to see the person standing right beside him. And that blindness, in the end, was the only legacy that mattered. Miriam drove home through quiet streets. The night was clear. Stars visible above the city lights. The air cool through her open window. She thought about the woman she had been when she first met Theodore. Young enough to believe that love could be tested. That hiding herself would reveal something true about the man who pursued her. She thought about the woman she had become during the marriage. Smaller. Quieter. Invisible in all the ways that mattered. And she thought about the woman she was now. Visible. Substantial. Taking up exactly as much space as she deserved. She had learned something in those years of hiding. Something valuable, though the lesson had been painful. She had learned that being seen was not something you could earn by being small enough or quiet enough or convenient enough. Being seen was what happened when someone chose to look. And if they did not choose to look, no amount of hiding or revealing would change that. Theodore had never chosen to look. That was his failure, not hers. She had hidden herself, yes. But she had also been standing right there the whole time, offering ideas and connections and support, being exactly who she was, even when she was not announcing it. He could have asked questions. He could have noticed the gaps in what she told him. He could have wondered about the woman he had married instead of assuming he already knew everything he needed to know. But he had not. And that was not something she could fix. It was not even something she needed to understand anymore. She had learned to see herself. That was what mattered. Miriam pulled into her parking space and sat for a moment in the quiet car. The night was peaceful. Her life was good. The work she was building mattered. She was not the woman Theodore had married. Not the woman who had hidden in the margins of someone else's story. Not the woman who had waited to be seen. She was herself now. Finally and completely and without apology. And that was more than enough. She got out of the car and walked into her building. Up the stairs to her apartment. Through the door into the space that was entirely her own. The city lights glittered through her windows. The evidence of her work surrounded her. Books and art and the comfortable accumulation of a life well lived. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window. Tomorrow there would be meetings and projects and the ongoing work of building something meaningful. Tonight there was just this. The quiet satisfaction of being exactly where she belonged. The peace of knowing who she was. The freedom of no longer needing anyone else to see it. Miriam raised her glass to the city lights. To being seen. She said quietly. Starting with seeing yourself. She drank. And she smiled. Because she was finally, completely, irreversibly free. The end.